I'm Dane Rose, and in this video we'll be exploring fractal patterns in the psyche, fractal patterns in identity. And I want to draw on, I guess, Exhibit A. Thich Nhat Hanh, in one of his books, or several of his books, talks about the importance of the Sangha, the spiritual community, the group. That to be a Buddhist monk and go out alone in exposure to all the different influences in the world is a vulnerable thing. And so part of being in a Sangha is to go out together and to support one another in maintaining a distinct identity in community. In family system dynamics, one of the sciences that is revealed is the dynamic of roles within the family system. That there will generally be a scapegoat. For example, there will be a favored or child who can do no wrong. There will be a shadow side that everyone is punished for acknowledging in any way. There will be a corrupt authority figure, and that's a very standard system, for example, in a United States and perhaps a Western family. Then you have group dynamics. You have the phenomena where if a crowd is looting, someone who would never loot on their own will loot. Then we have the phenomena of the authority, the mass numbers of Germans, and by extension, we have to understand that any country where, for example, millions of Americans were under Hitler in dictatorship in a similar culture and similar environment would exterminate a race following orders. And we see that with the prison experiments in the United States, where random college students were recruited for a psychological experiment and were told to torture other human beings. And as long as the order came from an authority, someone in a white lab coat in this case, they were quite happy to murder people by increasing their electric shock to a fatal rate, even while they listened to the screams and kicking of their victims next door. We also have the United States drone program, which is inducing large amounts of complex PTSD in the usually young men who are taught to play video games with other people's lives, launching missiles that guarantee that a majority of those murdered by these young men and their government and their culture are innocents, meaning a drone shot, statistically speaking, kills more innocent people than terrorists. Now, what does that make if you have any sense of symmetry, any intelligence, any sense of symmetry, and you define a terrorist as someone who terrorizes innocent people who do not deserve to die and possibly kills them, right? So that's what a terrorist is. Someone who terrifies and causes harm to innocent people. We're not talking about a war where two soldiers have volunteered and are, terrorizing each other as known warriors in a battle. we're talking about killing knowingly innocent people. And so what we're doing is we're transforming more and more American boys and men into terrorists while asking them to go insane. Because to terrorize innocent people, to murder innocent people in the name of ending a war on terror is to demand insanity, to demand stupidity, cruelty, to demand sociopathic behavior, and to demand that it not be named as cruel, sociopathic, and insane terrorism. We want you to go insane. We want you to be stupid. We want you to be cruel. We want you to be sociopathic. And we want you to become a terrorist. And then we want you to call that a noble act for your country. We want you to destroy your country's values. We want you to destroy your humanity. We want you to downgrade your intelligence. And we want you to spend public money to do so. And we want you to consider yourself a valuable asset in the war on an emotion, the war on terror, the war on an emotion. We want to terrify you. We want to teach you to terrify other people. And then we want you to relabel that a war on a feeling that you produce in amplified doses. And this is part of a fractal pattern that changes the identity, elicits PTSD in this case, American citizens. Now, another interesting phenomena along this kind of body of evidence is the phenomena of intergenerational sexual abuse. In other words, if your parents have been sexually abused, if your parents have been traumatized, you as a child have a higher probability of being traumatized and sexually abused by your parents and or by others closer in the family circle. Now, in order for sexual abuse or trauma or any abuse to occur, it has to be instigated from outside the child, and it has to be tacitly or actively encouraged or tolerated by the entire family system. Meaning, the entire family system at its best when abuse occurs has to agree not to spot lies. Because if the family system is one of truth, then you dig in and expose lies. That's part of the system. Wait a minute, Mom, you said we don't eat dessert until after dinner, so why are you sneaking into the fridge to eat ice cream? That's a lie. Now, when the kid gets hit, rather than validated, you're right, I'm lying, I'm sorry about that, I'm sorry that I can't live my own doctrine, thanks for pointing it out, let's see if I can do better, but I've been lying for a long time, and I don't know why exactly, and I don't really want to break my pattern of lies. Rather, I want to reenact an unconscious program in my family where my mother said, this is what we do, and 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 then did the exact opposite, and then left me feeling worthless because I had to obey a set of rules that my parents did not have to obey to me, which is communicating a discrepancy in value. In other words, both of my parents were hypocrites and held me, a 6-year-old little girl, to a higher standard than they held themselves, which is saying that a 6-year-old girl should be able to do what we cannot. That's shame. We cannot tell the truth, but you should be able to, and you're learning from us, and you're very young, and we're your models. But you should be able to do what we cannot do when you're only 6 years old. That's shame. You should be able to do what we will not do for you. You keep your word to us, we'll lie to you. You speak intelligently and make sense, we'll talk nonsense. You will be hit and punished when you lie to us. We will make you feel like shit if you catch us lying to you. We'll deny it, or we'll hit you. And the discrepancy in treatment communicates worthlessness, communicates devaluation. You are less valuable than us. That's why you are held to a different standard. That's the entire premise of racism, the communication that as a result of skin color, you will be held to a different standard than us. The majority, who has the rank and power, the bigger one, who has the rank and power, the parent, the government, the majority, will hold themselves to a different standard than they hold the minority, the smaller one, the child. And in doing so, communicate the clear message, you are not worth equality. So you must behave differently than we do. If you make a mistake, it's a big deal and you deserve to be hanged and killed, and all of our judgments and cruelty is exonerated. If we make a mistake, we do not acknowledge it. We punish you for pointing it out. Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning are pointing out the abusive parent in the United States military. And rather than anyone going to jail for Abu Ghraib, for Reuters news murderers, through criminal drone shots in other countries, rather than people going to jail in the power structure, people are going to jail who talked about the abuse of power. Edward Snowden talked about the abuse of power of his bosses, for which his passport was revoked. He was hunted around the world. His life was endangered. And he's been exiled from his own country for telling the truth. So the message is, you will be treated worse than us because we can. Because we are better than you. We are more valuable than you. And we will exemplify that message in our behavior. And everyone who tolerates that message is tying in with the reptilian program of dominance through size and force. Everyone who tolerates that message is playing in to the reptilian program through size and force. We do it because we can, Might makes right. I am a reptile that dominates anything smaller than me and runs from anything bigger than me, and freezes when neither of those two suffices. A reptile is caught in fear based on trauma, leading to unresolved past pain projected into the future as a high probability that operates through fight, flight, freeze, running from that which is bigger than it, attacking and bullying that which is smaller than it, and freezing when neither of those two options are available. Fight, flight, freeze, traumatic symptoms. So what we're looking at is that an individual is co-opted, is suffused, is infected with a fractal pattern, with a viral meme, financially, socially, mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually. And I want to talk about that point of co-option. Why is it that in a group of Alcoholics Anonymous can a person sustain the identity, the habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing that abstains from alcohol, but alone, as an isolated individual, succumbs to the pattern of addiction that they were exposed to and infected with culturally by a majority? How is it that identity moves out as a fractal and viral pattern? Well, one aspect is the law of mass. The law of mass dictates that when a bowling ball and a pinball collide, the pinball goes flying, the bowling ball absorbs the energy of the pinball and continues undeterred in the direction in which it was traveling. On a flat, level playing field, if a bowling ball and a pinball are launched at 10 miles per hour each on a collision course, when they meet, the pinball bounces off, the bowling ball continues. When you have a crowd filled with rage, and you have an individual in meditation, and the two meet, all things being equal, the meditative state is shattered in the individual. In the rage and the fear it induces spreads through the individual as they encounter a large mass of emotion, a large mass of energy erupting in ungrounded presentation. What happens when a parent who has been sexually abused abuses their own child? What happens when a parent who has been sexually abused abuses their own child? When a parent who has been hit and beaten hits and beats their child? When a parent who has been routinely and systematically shamed and humiliated and criticized verbally, shames, humiliates, and criticizes their own child? Why is the rational brain smaller in its influence than the traumatic reptilian and limbic brain? And one of the reasons is the law of mass. The reptilian program of the reptilian brain, the fight, flight, freeze alligator brain, was developed 200 million years ago. The dreaming brain, the empathic brain, the transcendent brain that we have been known to touch from time to time, is emergent and very recent. So we have a law of momentum, we have a law of mass, we have a law of certainty. In general, that which has been around a long time effectively, that which has been developed for a longer period of time, it alters something new. If a new seedling encounters an oak tree and there's a tension, the seedling is what dies, not the oak tree. If a new emergent pattern of energy is coming out of the ground, a single hoof of a deer can snap the branch and kill the seed. But once that seed grows into an oak tree that's 3 feet in diameter, an entire herd of deer could not knock the oak tree over, let alone snap it with a single hoof. And so you have a law of mass, which in part has to do with the intensity and development over time. And this is important because children and citizens and individuals are in the same situation as that seedling in relationship with the herd of deer, with the oak tree, etc. Because the parents have been around for a long time and the infant is young. The parent has an established pattern, an established identity, a habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing that has momentum and emotional charge behind it. The infant is in a very vulnerable, very innocent state of unformed identity. And that liquid innocence encounters the form of the parent and experiences being sharply rewarded for conforming and fitting the pattern of the giant, and experiences major disruption and violation when they try to establish a pattern more true to their nature at odds with the established identity of the parent. And whether this is as gentle as the process of language, because an infant can learn any language on the planet and any language not on the planet. An infant could learn any system of symbolize or symbols through sound and could learn to write any symbol to mean different sounds. And yet the child is experienced and exposed to the parent lighting up when the child says dada, mama, you, Dane, me. And the parent gives no reward or is not interested when the child just goos and gaws and makes other sounds. And so the child hones in on that which is rewarded facially, tonally, and in attentiveness and in loyalty. That's my son, that's my boy. He looks like me, he talks like me. That's what I would do. He's mine. Therefore, I will protect him. He doesn't have my skin color. He's not mine. I won't protect him. You had an affair. That's not my boy. He doesn't look like me. He doesn't talk like me. I'm disgusted by him. I'm not going to protect that which I don't identify with. I'm this identity, and I defend my identity, not my happiness, my identity. I defend my identity, my habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing. It's mine, and you belong with me or to me if you have a similar identity. If you believe other things, if you think other things, if you feel other things, if you feel in different ways, you're not like me. So I will not protect you. I will protect my own, what? My own identity and those who conform to it. So a child's drive to survive, etc., encounters what can be an incredibly ruthless boundary. This is dad, that's not dad, apparently. If I do this, I'm dad's boy. If I do this, I'm something else. If I do this, I get protected. Or hated, but at least noticed. Because in a child's hierarchical drive, first they need to know that they exist. That's the very first thing that every child needs. They need to know that they exist, that they have impact. It's the number one drive. The number two drive is to have control of the existence, to direct the impact, to have agency. And the number three is to improve the state, to feel better. I exist. I have some impact on that existence. And finally, once those two have been satisfied, that I feel better than I did before. The drive to grow towards grace, to become more intelligent, to spend less energy and create more sustainable well-being. I have a drive for that after I know I exist and after I establish regulation in some nature. Now, one of the interesting things in the misunderstanding of this point is that in an unsophisticated model of psychology, we don't recognize that the need for control trumps the need to feel better. Every teenager in Western culture, statistically speaking, gets tired of the emotional volatility of their parents being able to bribe them with a lollipop or whatever it is and get all excited and then break their heart by lying, betraying, breaking commitments, forgetting appointments, etc., and communicating valuelessness. And so the teenager establishes a bunker in the psyche at a low level of sustainable state. Depression, cynicism, boredom, these are all very easy for a teenager to hold on to. So having realized that the giddy joy of the child when bribed with a lollipop or whatever it is can be taken away in a moment with a betrayal, with a lie, they do not feel agency. A teenager realizes that they are at the whim of energies that are bigger than them, that they have issues with. Trying to be happy when a grown-up can hit you or lie to you and destroy that happiness communicates not agency, but futility. And so there's a collapse and a feeling of helplessness. And the adolescent is looking not to feel good. The adolescent is looking to feel in control of their own emotional state. And what they discover is that they cannot prevent themselves from being knocked down. if an abusive parent or teacher or older sibling wants to take them down, they can. They can just keep pushing and pushing and pushing until the child erupts in helpless frustration, pain, despair, anger, hatred, and rage. And this is what many bullies focus on. I want to see you in complete and utter despair. And I want to know that I did that. And I want to know that I can do that. Because it lets me know that I exist and that I have control. So the bully is looking for the same fundamental agency that the victim is. Now, the bully has superior mass. Bullies always pick on people smaller than them. Bullies don't pick on people twice their size, because the goal of the bully is to have agency through reliving the trauma on the other side. Every bully has been bullied and experienced a lack of agency in order to give their parent or their older brother or the big guy or the tough guy at school, to give them agency. So there's a lack of agency. In a culture with incompetent parenting that is psychologically illiterate, there is no answer to systematically giving a sense of agency to every child. So they have to copy the coping mechanism of traumatized and abused grown-ups, often parents, and look at how they got agency in a dysfunctional culture. And if it's by bullying the child, then the child looks for a dog or something and copies the agency protocol and says, okay, I'm going to get agency by doing to you what was done to me. Now I've learned it. I've learned my lesson. First I exist, now I have agency. Now the victim, on the other hand, that's going on this roller coaster and is losing any sense of agency. Mom tickles me. I don't want to be tickled. But mom wants a sense of agency, so she tickles me anyway. So now I laugh uncontrollably. Then mom hugs me and smothers me, and I don't want that. But she does it anyway, because she wants the feeling of control, and hugging and smothering a 2-year-old gives her a sense of control. She doesn't want to tune into someone else. She's looking for something she didn't have when she was 2 years old. She's looking for agency. It feels great to mom, the power to terrorize, the power to make laugh uncontrollably, the power to extort lies from the child. Am I a good mommy? You're not going to get this lollipop unless you say I'm a good mommy. Am I a good mommy? Okay, here's your lollipop. I can get this kid to say anything. I have agency. The kid doesn't. They're being led around in insanity by a sociopathic child in a grown-up body who's finally discovered that they can copy their parents and that it feels good because it provides symmetry. If I'm worthless to you because you're bigger than me, but you're equal to me and you're smaller than me, I'm caught in the middle and I feel worthless. But if I'm worthless to you who are bigger than me, and you're worthless to me and I'm bigger than you, now there's symmetry, now there's balance. The meme can continue. I get dumped on with heavy weights from you up here, but I don't have to carry all of those heavy weights. I can turn around and dump those weights that are too heavy for me on you down here. And then you, if you follow the meme, will dump those heavy weights on someone smaller than you. It may take time. You may have to wait until you have an infant and then dump them all on them, and then you'll feel so much better. Because when you were 2-year-old, you felt small, terrified, and helpless, and there was nothing you could do with all that terror. And now you've got a helpless 2-year-old, and you can terrify them, and there's nothing they can do about it. And then when they grow up and have children, they can dump the terror on them, and everyone's happy. There's symmetry. You give the weight to me, I give it to you, you give it to you, and an abusive sociopathic meme ripples through the cult and is normal. And because we like to look good, and we don't like to look bad, and we all agree that it looks bad to say that we terrorize and bully our infants and raise sociopathic parents who are psychologically illiterate and highly traumatized by dysfunctional governments and each other. Let's just relabel all that, just like the US military calling inbred terrorism and sociopathic behavior heroism. We just take out the terror, the T, and put the H, heroism. Not terrorism, heroism. You're a hero. You killed 30 innocent victims today, but they don't matter. What really matters is your courage. You pressed a button on a video game console, and a suspected terrorist who might have been preparing to kill someone is now dead. Now, you've killed 30 people, but don't focus on that. This horrible individual who you've killed has been stopped from what? Killing innocent people that you've just killed. You're a hero. It's so simple. You just cross out one letter and put in another. It's so simple. And now you're insane. Because we're calling an act of terror an act of heroism, which is not what heroism means. So we're just insane. We're saying that I'm beating you to a 6-year-old for your own good, because I care about you. I've got to beat you because my parents cared about me enough to beat me. And I'm not going to stop caring about the family after all that beating. I really got how much they beat me, and they had a good label for it, so I'm going to use the same label. It doesn't take any energy. Memes continue. It takes energy to interrupt a meme. Memes continue at the intensity with which they began, unless an equal or greater force interrupts the meme. The bowling ball will roll forward until it encounters a mass and momentum that is equal or greater than its own to interrupt the pattern. Bing! Now the pattern, now the bowling ball goes off in a different direction or stops. And if we understand that sexual abuse and trauma in various forms were handed down to children in an extraordinary intensity by giants, while the child is in a vulnerable and helpless state, while the child is in a feminine state of profound innocence and receptivity, then we can understand that that child has absorbed a major program, a major pattern of energy very intensely, and that they will roll with that program into the future until a force equal or greater interrupts that pattern. But our cult does not provide such a force. A therapist writing in a notebook, "Oh, very interesting, tell me more," is not a force of passionate, stopping helplessness. Try and get a therapist out of their chair to actually protect a child being actively abused. They're terrified because that would mean breaking the pattern, Many therapists have been abused themselves. That's why they became therapists. They understood these things were important. They understood how vulnerable it was to go to a therapist. So it's much better to be paid to have other vulnerable people come to you and help you feel that you're not alone without actually having to get off your butt and go stop the abuse. I told over 100 therapists about another sexually abusive therapist. No one wanted to talk about it. If they did, they wanted to be paid to listen to my feelings about being sexually abused by a therapist. No one wanted to go to court. No one wanted to stop what is, by definition, if you're a professional therapist who abuse a client, by definition, you abuse other clients. It's not a one-off event like, for some reason, I just feel like being incompetent with this client. It's a pattern. And therapists have a pattern, much like doctors, of not confronting other doctors. You can see another example of this in hospitals, where doctor malpractice is one of the single leading dangers to patients. And if you look at what kills people in America, I think it's third or fourth in the list of dangers to an American person's health is malpractice in a hospital. So it's a big deal. Now, one of the interesting things in studies is if doctors are supposed to wash their hands. But they did some covert camera studies to see how many nurses would confront a doctor and say, hey, you can't touch that patient without washing your hands and wearing gloves. A minority would stand up for the patient and risk offending the doctor. In Asia, where this rank offense protocol is even stronger than America, the biggest reason that one of the Asian airlines had more plane fatalities than any other airline was because it was considered rude and losing face to tell the pilot about a problem. Because the pilot is supposed to be perfect, the parent, the government, is supposed to be perfect. To point out an obvious mistake that the pilot is making is to reveal the truth that they're not perfect. And so, there was one incident where this plane just flew into a mountain. And it turned out that everyone knew that the plane was going to fly into a mountain, but they didn't want to offend the pilot by pointing out that he needed to raise the nose of the plane. So they all crashed into a mountain. That is a traumatized, terrified child in relationship to an authority figure who will beat you, humiliate you, destroy you, make you feel like shit for pointing out their mistake. If you do that extensively to a child, and they get that the real sin is pointing out the mistake of the parent, the pilot becomes the surrogate parent in a cult of this nature, in a hierarchical cult of this nature. The pilot becomes the surrogate. But whatever we do, we're not going to point it out, because I'd rather die than be humiliated, excluded, beaten, and shamed the way I was before. Mom and Dad don't make mistakes. We don't talk about this. We don't talk about that. And then I get to belong. And then I get to survive as a child in an abuse cult. So what's happening on the inside as we move towards these fractal patterns, because one of the interruptive dynamics, one of the forces that's equal or greater to a pattern is consciousness. If you infuse a pattern with consciousness, you bring about a gap between stimulus and response. You bring about a spaciousness of possibility and probability. You create liquidity in the pattern. The more conscious the pattern, the more liquid the pattern. And so consciousness has an opportunity to interrupt a dysfunctional pattern. Now, what brings consciousness? Language. Language. Talking about something in nuance and transparently brings consciousness into it. Having a discussion, a long-form discussion. What's going on here? Why is this happening? What does this mean? What are you feeling at this moment? How old are you right now? Are you 25 years old or are you 2 years old emotionally right now? Oh, I see. So when this happens, you go from being 25 to 2. And now a 2-year-old is viewing this, and a 2-year-old is perceiving this, and a 2-year-old is acting like this, which makes sense if you're a 2-year-old infant, but doesn't make sense if you're a 45-year-old male. But I don't feel like a 45. I feel like I'm 2. I see. What's the point that turns you back? What's the point there? I see. So this correlates with this pattern before that has not been dealt with. So both patterns explode into your body. And when both of these patterns come on that have not been addressed as traumas, you become 2 years old. And then as a 2-year-old, you do this because that's what you did in this situation. I see. I see. See, now we can slow it down. Now everyone in a circle can hold the pattern. Okay, watch for it, watch for it. Let's love that 2-year-old together. You're going to become 2 years old in a few minutes. Let's all learn to love that 2-year-old. Let's be there in the pattern with them at 2 years old. Because when you were 2, you were not a mass equal or greater to the pattern of the bullying around you. But as a group now, 5 people who are all older, who will stick by that 2-year-old, who understand the pattern, they can fight back the abuser in the way the 2-year-old who is regressed cannot. So let's explore that. Let's open that up. But to do that, you have to have language. To do that, you have to have advocacy. To do that, you have to have trauma literacy, which by extension includes psychological literacy. And you also have to be operating from the empathetic brain, or at least the rational brain, which doesn't hold sway while you're in the midst of PTSD and trauma. So someone needs to help enough of the people there to answer enough of their trauma that the reptilian brain lets go and the consciousness rises up to the rational and the empathic and the transcendent brain. And while in the rational, empathic and transcendent brain, with some degree of competency, address the law of mass. Address the issue that when the person goes into the pattern, they first feel overwhelmingly helpless. They feel overwhelming despair. They feel overwhelm, and they feel pain as they identify with the small, unprotected child inside. When that reaches a breaking point where they cannot meet their need to feel that they matter, and they cannot feel a sense of agency as the victim, What the victim does is dissociates from themselves as a victim and associates with the identity of the perpetrator. And they think, feel, and behave like their perpetrator towards themselves. So now they feel the same hostility towards their own inner child as the perpetrator felt towards them. And in this dynamic, they feel agency as the perpetrator. So now the perpetrator is getting agency by bullying them, and they're getting agency by identifying with the bully bullying them. So now both people have a sense of mattering and agency, and the desire to feel good moves towards passing the bullying on to someone smaller. Because you cannot break the pattern until the victim dissociates from the bully and identifies with the helpless victim, which is overwhelming, and then breaks from that point of view with help, with support, with mass from outside the system. Helpful friends, therapists, etc., breaks the pattern. And then the victim is no longer a victim. The pattern is given back to the abuser. In this dynamic, the pattern is healed. It doesn't need to be passed on. The person can identify and love their own helpless child, who is no longer helpless, who is helped. But as a traumatized individual with regressed trauma moves towards the pattern of their trauma, they must decide whether or not they can meet their need for existence, for agency, and feeling better as the victim rebutting the abuse, or as identifying with the abuser. If there is no training, if there is no resource available to the victim, the despair and helplessness of the inner child, the abused one, will pivot into dissociating from the victim and associating with the bully, with the abuser. Once that identity is crystallized as a protection from the helplessness and despair of the victim, now that identity as a protection from that pain must seek fuel, because all identities are maintained by a force of habit. You feed an identity by speaking, acting, thinking, and feeling consistently with the identity. So if I want to be a hero, I can't just do nothing I have to think about the times I was a hero. I have to feel what it was like to be a hero. I have to go out and be a hero for someone. I can't say that I'm this great hero who has never done anything heroic and is not doing anything heroic. I have to feed the identity by going out and embodying it, doing some things, saying some things consistent with that identity. Then I can hang on to the identity. I am the one who does this, says this, thinks this, feels this. Now, when the abuser identity is hung on to as a defense against the exquisite helplessness, grief, and pain of the victim identity, of the traumatized identity, and that's the only escape, meaning there's no heroism in this dynamic because no one was a hero to that child. No one intervened. And when the child piped up about it, maybe they were told to shut up and learn their ABCs at school or whatever. No one intervened. So there is no hero identity. There's the victim identity that terrifies and overwhelms me. And then there's the perpetrator identity that is my escape out of the victim identity. It's my ticket out of terror. The problem is the identity of the perpetrator starts to fade. So I have to remember the scene of the perpetration and identify with the perpetrator. I have to remember being raped and imagine what it was like to rape me. And I have to enjoy raping me as the perpetrator. I've got to do that to feed the identity of the perpetrator. And I've got to feed that identity so that I don't slip into the helpless terror of the victim that has no answer, because there was no answer in a dysfunctional cult. So how do I, when I get too close to my victim, and every parent who sees the helplessness and innocence of their children gets very close to, through empathy, through mirror neurons, to that helpless, innocent state. So as they get close to that, and it sucks them into the memories of their abuse that they can't deal with, they've got to bolster the abuse identity that they covered the victim identity with. Which means that they've got to do something abusive that helps them say, I am not the victim, I am the abuser. How do I know that? I didn't get victimized recently, and I just abused my children. I am the bad abuser. I just raped my daughter again. There's no question about it. I have escaped the victim identity. I've escaped the helpless identity. By reinforcing the abuser identity, the two being a dialectic available, child and adolescent. There's no adult present. You see, there's no adult present in a house where molestation is taking place. Everyone's agreeing to lie and look the other way. No one's talking about it. There's no adulthood in the culture. The entire cult is colluding in a psychologically illiterate state with psychologically illiterate people. Now, it would just take 5% of healthy individuals to say, hello, we embody psychology every single day. Studies show that 75% of your income in a capitalist cult where money is more important than people, 75% of your income comes from your relationships with other people. And your relationships with other people are two psychological programs, two psychological identities interacting. So studying those programs and refining those interactions has got to be at a rational, intelligent, pragmatic, scientific level, the single most important science for any human being to study. So why are we going cradle to grave without a single hour of psychological literacy presented from a scientific perspective? Not in kindergarten, not in middle school, not in high school, not in college, not at work. Why the fuck are we committed as a cult to mass psychological ignorance? Why are we committed to stupidity that is profoundly unscientific? Why? And how about introducing it? How about talking about abuse dynamics in high school when people are being abused? And how about talking about interventions when someone could use an intervention? In any high school class in America, someone's being sexually abused, if not many. Someone's being beaten. Someone's being shamed and humiliated. These are viral patterns. How about teaching our students how to be a little bit more mature than the immaturity of their teachers, if teachers truly cannot do anything about it for political reasons? How about dealing with a little sanity by being a little bit empathic, by looking at the data? How about it? Well, if you're surrounded by children that go into freeze, okay, We don't have any adults around here. Anyone? Will I be attacked for being the only adult who talks about this? Will I be ostracized for breaking the taboo and talking about this? Is there anyone who's interested in a scientific, better way called psychological literacy? Anyone at all? Okay, we've got one. That's a start. It just takes a few people amongst an ocean of children, amongst an ocean of sleepers, to wake up a little and ask for some changes in the system. If the system cannot survive those changes, it's time for a new system that can. So this is the key point here. Somewhere in the process, the individual gets big enough, becomes enough of an adult that they can advocate for their own inner child being abused, that they could not do as a child and could not do before, and that no one could do for them. When an adult can face the helplessness and hopelessness of their own inner child, hopefully with help if there's any other adults around, but if not, with transcendent support, spirit guides, angels, higher self, deities. If you can project it and imagine it, it's there. Because energy can take any possible configuration that can be imagined and then some. When you can bring a healing, healthy presence into the dynamic to shift it, you can break the pattern, but not before. But not before. Now you can identify with the victim rather than the abuser, which means letting go of the abuse identity. Now you're no longer abusing other people the way you were abused. When you can embody the adult, the healer, the hero, you can now advocate and transform that inner child into a new system. You've now broken the taboo, you've broken the pattern. Which means once you've done that deeply, you can do it for other people. Which means they can stop abusing themselves and other people and go on to break the pattern as well. And the more people who break a pattern, the easier it becomes to break the pattern. Because what's being dealt with is the number one drive to exist, the second drive to have agency. If you cannot have agency to stop the abuse, but can have agency as an abuser, you will be an abuser. Because the need for agency, the sense of control, is higher than the need for morality, whatever that is, or feeling good. I need to know I exist. I need to know I have control. And then while holding on to those two, I need to climb state. I need to climb from, it's a low state to be a bully. It's a low state to be a victim. Maybe a bully is slightly higher state, depending on how you process it, depending on how you view it. Say, I was bullied, now I'm a bully. I feel a little more agency as a bully than the one bullied. It doesn't feel very good to be a bully, though. You're still trapped in the identity. I'm now the one that transforms major cult patterns. I'm a shaman. I'm a transcendent one. There's an identity there that if it's real as opposed to just bullshit and language, if it's real, allows for a beginning glimmer to break out of that system. if I can feel agency, if I have some sense of control, as opposed to it's just insanity, it's just bullshit. If I have agency, if I can break out of that identity, and when I set a goal, make it happen. Visionary. I vision something and then I make it happen. Create it. Well, now I have a visionary identity. But as I break out of my family system, now there's a cult system. As I break out of the cult system, now there's a government system. And each one feels threatened by a rupture of identity. Each bully at each level, internal and out, feels the uncertainty, the hesitancy, the vulnerability of breaking out of a cult meme and establishing something new. And it takes mastery, it takes intelligence to break out of that pattern and still survive as an autonomous identity, to break out and not just rebel into someone else's group, but to actually create and hold a new energy. It's what being an adult, being a spiritual adult, is all about. None of this can happen until we can go into our deepest wounds as a victim and learn to love that little one as an adult. That's what makes it an adult, the one who loves and cares for those who need love and care. That's what an adult is, on the inside and on the outside.